Hello again. I dare say that some viewers might have noticed a tiny cloud on the financial horizon yesterday when it was casually announced that in April the rate of inflation in Britain had doubled. This is hardly surprising, although nonetheless alarming for being expected. Over the last year or so, the British government has been throwing around money like a drunken sailor. There seems to be an inexhaustible supply of the stuff, and every week some new scheme is announced costing millions or billions of pounds or more. Where are they getting it all from, you ask yourself? The answer is that they're stealing it from you. I don't mean in taxes, which they are levying, although that's where a small part of it comes from. The great majority, though, will be stolen from your bank account, savings and pocket without you even knowing how it's being done. Welcome to the fascinating world of inflation. Inflation is one of those ideas which is really simple, although governments and economists try to make it sound complicated by talking about things like quantitative easing and other stuff which hardly anybody understands. They want you to think it's too hard to grasp for the ordinary person, because otherwise you would object to having your pocket picked. Fortunately, I can explain how this particular stunt, which is essentially a criminal activity, is performed. The first thing to remember is that the less there is of something, the more valuable it is. Diamonds are valuable simply because they are rare, and we don't see all that many of them. Pebbles on the beach, on the other hand, are not worth much because there's lots of them about. This sounds obvious, but we seldom think about the fact that the same thing applies to £5 notes. The more of them about, the less they're worth. At one time, a £5 note was a rare sight, and this meant that they were very valuable in those days. Now they're floating about all over the place, and as a result, they're much less valuable. That's inflation. A £5 note is worth about a tenth of what it was in the 1970s. That is to say, it will buy a tenth of the goods or services which it might have bought then, because there are far more of them in circulation now. When that happens, when money loses its value, ordinary people suffer because the money in their savings is worth less. It's as though somebody has taken away some of the value of those savings. All this is fairly easy to understand, of course. Prices go up and your money buys less. You have been robbed. Who has stolen it? Well, that's easy to see too. The people who have stolen it are those who print it. What the government have been doing for the last few years is printing more and more money. Over the last year, they've had the presses at the Bank of England printing works in Debden running day and night to keep up the supply. This is how the economy has been stimulated artificially for almost a decade. The idea is if the economy gets a little bit sluggish, then you inject some money into it and that will soon get it moving again. In theory, it's really easy. You print more money, which people then spend. They buy things like new TVs or mobiles, which means that shops and factories do better, and this in turn means more taxes are paid and so on. The money is created by a neat dodge called quantitative easing. This sounds very mysterious, but it's actually quite simple. There are various bonds and investments floating around, which might have a nominal value of thousands, tens of thousands pounds. People buy them and they trade them, like to hang on to them sometimes because they pay a good rate of interest. So the government decides that they'll buy up a lot of these bonds. This means if they buy £1,000 million worth of bonds, that's another £1,000 million in money circulating in the economy, which is bound to be spent. Sometimes it's spent on building things, in which case workmen are employed, paid wages, which they then spend. It all goes into circulation somehow. The problem is, of course, that this is also how inflation gets going. Remember what I said earlier about the more £5 notes floating around, the less they are worth? This affects your savings and wages as well. If you have £1,000 in the bank right now, and inflation is running at 10% per annum, then after a year your £1,000 is only worth £900. Next year it will be worth £810 and so on. In the course of 2 years the government have pinched almost £200 of your money. I've lived through a couple of grim periods of inflation, including one spell of hyperinflation, and it really isn't fun. In Britain, the Labour government from 1974 to 1979 was printing money at a frantic rate, and it led to a terrible recession. I have an idea that this might be heading our way now, unless the present government stops turning out so many £5 notes.